It's not live until
So it says you're live. So we are live now. Hello, everybody. I'm Kevin Griffin. And I'm joined by the one, the only, the man, the myth, the legend, Nicolas Cage. I'm sorry, Paul Chin Jr. How are you, Paul?
Hello and welcome, everybody, my brothers and sisters. I am Paul Chin Jr. It's such a pleasure to be here.
And
Kevin.
We'll give everyone a chance to flood in now. If you have never been to a SwiftKick webinar before, your chat should be on the right side of the screen. And say something. Say hi to Paul. Say hi to me. If you just want to chit-chat during the session or ask a question, use the chat for that. And, you know, that's what a chat's for. It's to be used. And Blaine.
Don't be shy.
Hi, Blaine. Hi, Elizabeth. Hi to Paul.
Hey, Elizabeth. Hope you're doing great. Are you having a praise cage kind of day? If you're just joining us now and you're expecting real serious information, you may or may not be disappointed. However, we will all learn how to be a little more serverless.
Yes. So what? What? Huh?
Oh, I was going to say, whenever you want to throw over control.
Okay. Well, let me do my little spiel real fast, and we'll get started. All right. So hello again, everyone who's joining us around the interwebs. My name is Kevin Griffin. I am the owner of SwiftKick, a software consulting and training company based out of beautiful Chesapeake, Virginia. And this is one of our bi-weekly webinars with Mr. Paul Chin Jr. as our special guest. Hello, Paul Chin.
Hello, everybody.
And next slide never goes when you tell it to. There we go. Yeah. All right. If you are on the social medias, the Twitters, the Facebooks, the LinkedIns, we have placements there. I would love to connect with you in some way, shape, or form. Hit us up on Twitter or on Facebook. Say something nice, especially if you like to talk. Go look us up on any of these platforms, and we're usually promoting the next upcoming things as well as the webinars we've had in the past. Always something new, because if you stop listening for a second in this industry, you're going to get left behind. And the stuff that Paul is talking about today, this is what folks are going to really be talking about for the next year, couple years, as the next big thing. So if you want to be the smart person going into an office meeting, probably not this week because it's the week before everyone's leaving for holidays. But the next office meeting you have, go, well, let me tell you about serverless. You would have known because you were here in this webinar.
This makes great holiday party chatter too. So
yeah, we have more webinars coming up in the future. So today, Mr. Paul Chin Jr. And a couple of weeks after the holidays, we have Miss Emily Freeman. I'm not quite sure what she's going to talk about yet. We've been discussing options, but it's guaranteed to be good stuff. After that, we have Mr. Matt Groves. Matt Groves is an evangelist or an advocate for the company called Cloudbase. So it's going to be something database related or NoSQL related. Not quite sure yet. After that, we have the amazing, awesome, totally really cool person, Linda Nichols, who was supposed to be today, but she had something come up, and Mr. Paul Chin Jr. graciously filled in her place. And then after Linda, we have Josh Carlisle. And Josh will be talking a little bit more about Azure Functions, which is serverless. So if you don't get enough serverless today, or serverless just entirely changes in the next couple of months, come back in February and you'll learn more about Azure Functions in particular. But We'll send emails out to everyone who's registered as these webinars get scheduled and as we have more information about them. So you're already on the list unless you unsubscribe, which you don't want to unsubscribe. It's a really good list. Without further ado, I am going to pass it over to Mr. Paul Chin Jr., our special guest. And Paul, I'll let you do your own thing.
Okay.
So,
thanks.
all right. Go ahead.
I appreciate it.
Go ahead and take control. I'm going to turn off my video and enjoy.
Let's get it switched over onto the other channel here. Welcome, everybody. My name is Paul Chin Jr. I'm a cloud software engineer at CloudReach and a preacher of the Church of Nicolas Cage. I want to welcome you, my brothers and sisters, for today. We're going to go serverless. We have been chosen. No, we have been called upon this glorious path. We are web developers. We create tools, services, and techniques to only worship the one true God, Nicolas Cage. We use the internet, and now we are called to create the most up-to-date and intelligent systems the world has ever known. And today I will share with you what this looks like, how it's not really all that different, and how you can use it to serve Nicolas Cage. So I want you now to rise up with me, rise into the clouds to become serverless. We can leave our servers behind on the floor of our offices. We don't have to create them on our own anymore. Feel the wind in your hair as you climb up to these clouds, as you rise up. So what does it mean to go serverless? It means you need to break up your existing monolith applications in a nice, intelligent way. So right now, your current application might look like this. There's a hosted server. Maybe it's in the cloud. Maybe it's already on premises. The database probably also lives on the same server. Inside that one web app that you've got going has the same functions that handle login and authentication, moving data to and from the database, and it also manages all of your users' inputs. So I've created an awesome app, a prayer app for Nicolas Cage. And this is what it would currently look like. So now, this is the serverless application, right? What's going on here? Your new serverless app now uses outsourced services to manage your code, manage the servers. The applications depend on these services to handle all of its server-side logic. It's a higher level of abstraction from providers like Amazon, Google, Azure, and IBM. And in a serverless application, in this one in particular, I think I should be able to draw on the screen. Check this out. Turn on whiteboard. Yeah. So we've got different things going on here, and here, and here, and all of these are just services from AWS, right? For example, we've got your static files hosted inside of an S3 bucket and then served by AWS whenever someone visits your domain. You didn't actually write any of the code to serve those files. You just check a box and AWS handles that. From there, the front-end code makes a regular HTTP request to the API gateway. And before any of that can happen, your awesome user, Nicolas Cage, signs in and authenticates using Cognito. These are all things that I didn't have to write, that I just hooked together using AWS. And so there from the API gateway, we call these Lambda functions, and I'll get to talk a little bit about functions as a service on their own. But the Lambda functions run, and they can talk to the RDS service, which is the relational database service. And all of this happens up in the cloud, and I didn't have to SSH into anything. I didn't have to choose a Linux distribution or any of that. So one of the cool things that I wanted this application to be able to do was also have some functions that would take a look at what the users were inputting and try to scrub it for any mention of the devil John Travolta, right? And so what happens inside of these Lambda functions is it's a single piece of code that executes on its own. With these functions as a service, they break up a bunch of tasks that would normally happen all inside of your app, and now they're running on their own and they're being called separately through the API gateway. Let's see here. Get to the next slide here. So serverless is all about the events. It's an event-driven architecture. So here's another example. When the user of our prayer app, right, they want to upload a photo with their prayer, what's going to happen is that their photo gets uploaded to an S3 bucket. And as soon as something hits the S3 bucket, it generates an event all within AWS. And the Lambda function is just constantly listening for changes and uploads to that S3 bucket. After that, it can then start generating the actual Lambda code itself. Will take the file, resize it, and restore it back in the database for your front-end code to display in different thumbnails. And that's really cool because from a web developer's perspective, I just have to write the Lambda function to make that happen. I didn't have to worry about creating that event. S3 already does it for me. I didn't have to worry about making sure that my Lambda function is running, or I didn't have to worry about making sure that it was available. AWS already does it for me. So what are these cloud functions, really? They are a way for you to write a single function, just does one thing. It responds to a single event. It runs some sort of logic and then returns to either back to the front or another function. And what that does for me is not have to worry about, if I take that function out, nothing else in my app is really going to break because it's not depending on anything. So if I go back and we look at how the current app might work, right? Our current app, it's not serverless. Everything's inside of this one web app. Imagine that it is just a single Express app. And in your Express app, you have to write all your routes. You have to create your API from scratch and do all of that. And all of your functions that are inside of it are still wrapped up inside of this one application, right? This one process. If that thing crashes, then your entire application goes down. Not so good, but if you split them all up and they are hosted in something like AWS, then the chances of one of your functions not working doesn't crash the rest of your site where your static files are hosted, and it doesn't take out your authentication service, and it doesn't take out the instance of your database that's running. So these are all ways that we can decouple these monolith applications. So now comes to a very cool part about what going serverless kind of means. One interesting existential consequence of writing serverless apps is that since you're no longer maintaining a single server or even a cluster of servers, these functions are stateless. So I put it to you that you must release your state. You must maintain your code in a state of statelessness, right? So if we look at the 12-factor book, chapter 6, verse 5, it says the 12-factor processes are stateless and share nothing. And you as a developer should also enter that same type of mind where you are holding nothing and being empty and open to state. So what that really means is that these Lambda functions, when they are run, the process starts, a container is created that AWS makes, your code runs, and then the container is destroyed. There's nothing in that process that allows it to hold on to any sort of state management in between when it runs. And I think that that's a really cool way to think about how to write nice, scalable, and maintainable code. And if you haven't checked out the whole 12-factor app thing, I highly recommend it. It's a really nice way to look at how to build great web apps. I think you can find it at 12factorapp.com or something like that. So let's take a look. So you hear a lot about these blank as a service. There's platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, services as services, software as services. And all serverless has become is this new fun buzzword for event-driven architecture where somebody else manages the back end. That's really it. Well, I like to think of it as is this new look for the same angle. Whereas before I would have written an Express app, now I'm letting AWS or Google or Azure handle installing some flavor of Linux onto some server somewhere, and then placing my code to be able to run in Node. I do all Node.js development, so it's nice to not to have to worry about updating it or maintaining versions of all that stuff. I just want to write my functions, and that's what serverless allows me to do. So you might be asking yourself, well, what about Heroku? I've written stuff in Heroku, and Heroku is super cool. It is not serverless. You're still managing dynos, and you're still sort of handling all of that infrastructure side. They add some nice stuff for automatic deployment and auto scaling, but you as a developer still kind of have to worry about a lot of those DevOps-y things. What about Firebase? Firebase is also really cool. Firebase is way more serverless. They have all backend managed solutions to where you're not installing things on top of a server. And then the question always comes up of like, what about containers? Containers are awesome, and I have no idea how they work. And I think containers are awesome because underneath every single Lambda function is a container. Essentially what happens is when the request comes in through the API gateway from your front end or from another serverless call, any kind of HTTP call or single event, a container is created with Node inside of it, and then your process runs on top of that, and then AWS goes ahead and destroys it. So without containers, none of this stuff works. But me as the web developer, I don't have to create any of that, and I don't have to know how any of that works in order to make my serverless apps. So what are some of the benefits? I like to call it better, faster, stronger. These are just new layers of abstraction on top of what we're already doing. So the best part is it's ultra cheap, right? You're only paying for the function runs. That's in contrast with maybe buying a DigitalOcean droplet, right? You're paying $5 a month for that instance, and they say, you know, only pay for what you run on DigitalOcean side, but you still have to start the server and stop the server, pause the droplet, create it. With Lambda functions, you're not manually doing that. Once you upload the single function that says like return hello world, you only get charged once someone runs it, which is different from creating a server and then manually powering it up or powering it down when you need it. I find it as way faster for deployments because I'm not writing boilerplate express over and over again. I worry about the one piece of logic that I have. I put it behind an API gateway, and then when a GET request comes in or a POST request comes in, I take the payload, do something with it, and move on. So I don't have to worry about trying to build all of that boilerplate from scratch. The other very, very cool thing about Lambda functions is that it automatically scales out horizontally. So more people use that function, more users hit it, it just keeps going. Amazon will create as many containers as it needs to keep going out and handling it, which means a lot of your code now you can by default run asynchronously. You can run a lot of stuff in parallel with the same chunk of code, which is super fun. And the big, big, big plus is there's no server management. I don't have to SSH into anything. As much as I love the command line, it's no fun to try to remote into a box, try to figure out why things are crashing. Amazon handles all that for me. And before you think that this magic sauce is really expensive, it's actually way cheaper. So somehow these cloud providers have figured out a way to do more for us and also not charge us as much. There's, I think there was a story from Amazon, or not from Amazon, there's a story from Netflix when they started implementing Lambda functions. They were running for months on the free tier because it gives you like 1 million requests a month for free. So if you want to start breaking apart your monoliths, sort of pick off the things that can run on their own, run pretty quickly, and maybe don't get hit more than 1 million times a year. And now you're getting to use that functionality for free. It's pretty incredible the kinds of things that you can build just using their infrastructure. So what exactly are some limitations? Because it can't always be gumdrops and roses in serverless land. And the biggest thing right now is that it is very new. There aren't any super best practices for it. Event-driven architecture is a thing, and there are some resources that you can read up on about that. But every cloud provider does things a little differently. You're going to have to relearn sort of what the differences are between all the platforms. And that also means that you have to choose a platform. There are ways to kind of roll your own with IBM. I haven't tried any of them, but I think they're pretty good. I've heard good things about them. The one limitation is runtime resources and environments. So right now, AWS uses Node 6, I think. And as new versions of Node roll out, we just kind of have to wait until AWS says, yep, now we're using a new version of Node, or yep, we're going to be using this version or that version, because you don't control any of it. There's no fine-grained controls on the actual server, which is both a benefit and a con, really, depending on what you need out of it. These functions also have a limited duration. I think the maximum runtime on them is like 5 minutes. So if you have a long-running process that has to chunk a bunch of data, maybe serverless isn't the ticket for you, right? It's not going to solve all of your problems, and doesn't mean that any one tool out there is the best for everything. Also, debugging isn't the smoothest with serverless. What happens is after you push your function up, you will get an endpoint for that one function. And then in order to test it, you just have to keep hitting that endpoint, and your server, you have to go to the server logs and watch them there. So I end up console logging a bunch of stuff, uploading my function, running the function, seeing if anything gets into the console log. And that means I have to go between multiple screens. And I'm sure over time, better and better tools will be coming out of it. So what's next? Resources. This is a list of resources that I would recommend for anybody out there who wants to get into serverless. The first is the actual framework, serverless.com. So if I do this correctly, I think I can come out to here. Here is the actual framework, serverless.com. Not to be confused with serverless as a concept. It's actually called the framework, and what this will allow you to do is npm install it, create a template, and it will spit out a few files to get you going. And it means that you can start writing configuration files instead of going through the AWS console web interface, which is not very fun. I would say try to make one Lambda function through the AWS web console first, and then see how weird it is. And after you see how odd it is to take your code, turn it into a zip file, upload it through a web browser, and then manually hook it up to the API gateway, you will then come running and screaming to this framework that you should have installed in the first place, and then learn to use it instead and deploy directly from your command line. But I think if you got an extra 10 minutes, go through the steps, click all the buttons, and you'll actually learn a lot of what's actually going on underneath the framework, which is always a benefit before you jump into any framework, really. So the next thing I would highly suggest is serverlessstack.com. I got to give a shout out to my boy Blaine for sending me to this. It is super cool. So somebody has written this serverlessstack.com as an open source guide where you basically build a to-do app, but it uses serverless technologies and React on the front end from beginning to end. And I really, really, really enjoyed it. It takes you through everything. It's very well documented and gave me a really good starting point for figuring things out, which leads me to my next resource, which is actually the AWS Serverless Labs workshops. So the GitHub repo is AWS Labs / AWS Serverless Workshops inside of the web application folder. This is a fun application where you build like an Uber, but instead of cars coming, unicorns come to pick you up. And it will use all of the the web console in order to create all of the things that you need. But what I did was smash together this AWS Labs unicorn ride and this serverless stack, serverless framework guide to create wild rides with a Y, serverless framework wild rides web app, to where it kind of does both, and you end up learning the framework a little bit, as well as learning what is a Lambda function, how do I actually upload things to S3. So that was a fun exercise when you're just starting to learn and just starting out. Also, another awesome link would be the serverless conf videos from A Cloud Guru. So serverless conf just happened. Big shout out to Linda Nichols, who was one of the speakers there, talking about how to avoid vendor lock-in. But all of these are the latest and greatest thought leaders in serverless. And I think that this is a great resource because things are moving just so fast, right? Nobody really has just the one place for knowledge of it. And every use case is going to be slightly different. So I highly recommend checking out these videos. All right. Now, oh, I feel it. I feel it coming. It is worship time. And what does that mean? I created a serverless demo. It's a Slack chat bot, and we're gonna share it with you now. So before any good demo, if you are sitting at home right now, live with me, I need you to raise your hands up in the air and reach out for Cage and bring him into your heart. Let him come through all of our souls in this demo. I will go over the technical kind of stack that I built. So if you remember, this is serverless. When I make this app, it doesn't actually, I don't have to manage anything. So what happens is I have a Slack integration that goes to this service called Dialogflow from Google. And Dialogflow is a natural conversation parser. So when a user types in some words, Dialogflow tries to figure out what the user is actually saying, passes what it thinks the user is saying to a Google Cloud function right here. And so the Cloud function is Google's version of a Lambda function. It creates a container, runs my node process, and then that actually calls the MovieDB, which is a open free API for movie information. And what we have made is the Cage match, because the problem is there are other movie recommendation engines out there. However, they are unpure. Sometimes they even bring back things who are not Nicolas Cage. And even worse, they bring back the devil, John Travolta, in their results. So what have I done? It's highly absurd. Let's check it out in action. Where did that go? So this is my Slack. I was actually able to get onetruegod.slack.com. And this bot says, it's called Cage Recommendation. So if you are in the chat right now, I'll give you a second to throw out a genre, any movie genre at all. Let's see if anybody's listening and still paying attention. Still with me? Any genre at all? Comedy. Okay, great. So I'm going to ask Cage, find me a comedy. And we should watch Vampire's Kiss. If you haven't seen Vampire's Kiss, it's very good. It's like the height of Nick Cage memery. Let's see, a history piece. I think, let's see. Find me a history movie. I think that might, you should watch Birdie. It's about the Vietnam War. Well, there you go. And if you're like, what is Birdie? I had no idea Birdie was a thing. I'm a poor follower of Nicolas Cage at this moment because I didn't know this movie existed. By the way, Nick Cage has 90 movie credits, which is why I built this. I keep testing it and I keep finding new movies I've never even heard of. So what I can do is ask, who is in it? And what's cool about Dialogflow is you can ask it different things. Like I've trained it, like who's in it? Who are the co-stars? Who else is there? And it tries to anticipate what the users might say. So instead of find me a movie, I can like tell me about an action movie. Oh, I see Ned Rhodes in there. He needs a musical. Oh, Lord Cage, come to me. Please give me a musical. You should watch Frank or Francis. Yeah, there we go. You should watch that musical. Give me a music movie. Cotton Club. And what's neat about my cloud function is it'll actually format the Slack response. So it has this nice sort of like collapsing image and a synopsis. And that is the current state of the bot. But I thought I'd show you real quick. Dialogflow currently right now is this sort of web console where you create these intents and entities. And I think last week the last session on the SwiftKick webinar was Greg Norman, who talked in much more depth about creating chatbots on the Google Action platform. So if you haven't, go check out that other SwiftKick video from Greg. But this is the Google Cloud function, and I think this will illustrate exactly what it is a little bit better. This is the web console for the actual Google Cloud function. So I have one cloud function here called Movie Webhook. And when Dialogflow says, yep, I see a genre, it calls this function. And it's just a snippet of code. Literally, when it comes up, here we go. So it literally is this file, index.js. And you can require other files along with it. You can install dependencies that are defined by your package JSON. And you export this one function. And this is where all the cloud providers are a little different in what the function expects. What's fun about Google Cloud Platform is it's seemingly Express underneath the hood. So while you're not actually writing an Express app, there's the request response object that you pass into it. And then it does some stuff. And then it returns back to Dialogflow. But the part that I wrote is just this. Like this is what I wrote. I didn't have to write anything else for this app to really work. Dialogflow is essentially configurations. It's not really writing code, but this is the code that I wrote. And by using the serverless framework, you write the code with the serverless framework, and then you type in your command line, serverless deploy, and then it hooks up to your Google Cloud account, bundles everything, sends it on up, creates the API endpoint for it, and then I dump that endpoint into Dialogflow right here. So that whole process was super cool, because now I have this really interesting looking chatbot, and I'm not paying for any of it. This is all like on the free tier, and I don't have to worry about starting like server.js every single time. I don't have to try to put like forever or nodemon on in front of it. Google Cloud's going to do that for me. And then if anything ever goes wrong, I can view logs, and it just essentially just creates both events that happen within the function itself and any console log statements that I decide to write out. So overall, I think that this is a really cool way to think about how you want to write your applications going forward, because as a developer, I don't have to worry about maintaining any of this. Somebody else is going to do it, and it's actually cheaper. Before, when I was creating other worshiping tools, I was paying $5 a month to DigitalOcean just to get like an instance of Ubuntu so I could run Node on it. I don't have to worry about that anymore. It's very freeing, and it forces you to write more maintainable and scalable code just by the way it works. I think this is super cool. So if we have time, let's see, let me go back over to my presentation. Oh, the code for Cage Match, the Cage Recommendation API, is on my GitHub. So feel free to check it out. I try to make some notes, and people can jump into it and check it out. So the future is always changing. It's kind of hard to figure out exactly what serverless is all at one go. So I definitely would recommend not breaking up your monolith application all at once. Try to, again, find those pieces that make sense, that aren't very long running, that could probably go off on their own. Maybe it's something like an image processing service or an email notification. AWS has a very cool email notification service that you can attach to your application and make it hit a Lambda function in order to process that data. Think of a small piece that can get broken off and added. But you already know how to do this. Like, I was writing Node code, and I just continue to write Node code, and I can forget about all the sysadmin stuff that I didn't learn in the first place. Now I really don't even have to worry about it. And it's still very, very new. Things are changing all the time. I'm most excited for better tools that are coming out, better debugging. Currently, Google Cloud Functions are in beta. And I think they said that they're going to come out of beta like first quarter next year, whatever that means. AWS has been around doing it the longest. I think they were the first at it. Azure Functions are great. They work fine. Blaine and I have made a serverless app called Taserface, where it uses image recognition and from a webcam stream to map other faces to the user's face, but all of that was serverless. So yeah, there's lots of new stuff coming all the time. And if you really, really want to roll your own, there's IBM OpenWhisk, and those will let you change stuff. So that concludes my presentation. I know this is just a webinar, so if you are watching later recorded and you have any questions, feel free to, thank you. I've got 2 other folks in the office today, and I hope they enjoyed it. But feel free to reach out to me on Twitter or on my GitHub.
And anyone watching your replay, they'll probably also have the chat that they can watch. And if they type in the chat, even though we have gone off to better things, I'll get an email with their question that I can just send to you personally, Paul. And you
great.
can respond to them.
Yeah. It's a lot of fun learning about serverless architecture and doing things sort of in this event-driven way. And it does take a little bit of practice, and you just have to see it a couple of times. But really, there's nothing different about it. It's just I don't have to manage stuff anymore, and it's fantastic.
Well, awesome. Right. So, audience, you have 1 more minute to ask any questions in our chat before we just let Paul go do something else.
Kevin, do you have any questions? Any follow-ups? Any follow-ups on your thoughts on serverless?
I'm still not completely sold on serverless. I'm going to hold on my server with my bare hands. So it's more of when I do a form of serverless. So it's not serverless as in just individual functions. It's serverless as in more platform as a service, where I don't care. I'm running on a server. I don't care what server I'm running on. I'm just deploying my software, and my software goes off and does good things. If the server dies, it doesn't matter to me. My software just gets picked up, moved to another server automatically, and redeployed. Or I need 10 servers, so just or 10 instances that are all running, so that some sort of auto scaling, and that just happens for me automatically. It's not serverless in the form that you discuss serverless, but it's still I don't care about where it's running. It's just it's being executed for me in some way, shape, or form.
Let's see. That's a good question. Is Zapier part of a serverless architecture?
It could be.
I'd say so. Yeah, because those are event triggers.
Yep.
And you don't really care how they happen or when they happen. So if you write an email and then it automatically creates a Trello card, you have created a serverless application.
Yep.
That's awesome. I didn't think about it that way.
I think a lot of developers in particular, the biggest mindset change is thinking about their applications as events, not as functional flow. I have a lot of applications I walk into. It's where I click the button charges the credit card and then sends the email. And if anything in there breaks, the entire thing breaks. And you don't take those people and take them straight to serverless. Their minds explode. What you do is you take baby steps backwards and go, okay, well, let's look at this in terms of events. There are certain things that will need to happen eventually. How do we pull these pieces out and move them out of the main application? So when I click the button on the screen does a series of things, but they're not all related to each other. They can all happen outside, maybe in a sequence or outside of a sequence, some sort of workflow. And then take that a step further and go, okay, what if we don't even control the machine that those run on? What if we just take the individual, well, here's the function for sending the email. Let's move that over here. And we've now gone to serverless.
I definitely think I benefit from not having done a whole bunch of traditional stuff and just sort of starting with a fresh look at like more cloud native applications. Because for me, it just makes nothing but sense to separate all your functions out that can have like automatic like parallel running. Like no matter how many people come and hit that function, that one function will keep running forever. Will keep getting spun up and created and destroyed forever and ever and ever.
Yep.
Cool. All right. Well, I thank you, Kevin, for having me on. This was a lot of fun. I appreciate it. I hope everyone at home listening right now learned something.
I think so. Thank you, Mr. Paul Chin Jr., for joining us. And thank you to everyone out there in the interweb for joining us. And hopefully you'll come back in a couple weeks and join us for our next great episode.
Praise Cage.
Praise Cage.
Praise Cage. Thank you.